Welcome to the Terrible Podcast with your hosts from SteelersDepot.com, where you can find all your latest and greatest Steelers news. It's Dave Bryan and Alex Kozora, always lit, talking Steelers. And now, here's Dave and Alex.
Welcome to the Terrible Podcast, Season 16, Episode 92. He's Dave Bryan. I'm Alex Kozora, SteelersDepot.com. Thanks for being back with us this Wednesday, Steelers Nation. I have a great show for all of you today. Going to hear a lot less of Dave and myself and more of our Steelers Depot Roundtable crew who were down in Frisco, Texas for the Shrine Bowl and the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit. Pretty light on the Steelers news today, but a couple things to touch upon. Dave, how you doing?
All right. Happy Wednesday to you. And I think today is Combine Invitation Day, is it not?
It is. The list of 300 some odd number of invites officially released by the league today. And so we'll talk about that maybe more for the Friday show. I know you usually have a post on that for the website. 319, the official number going to Indy this year per the NFL.
All right, and I think people will find out during our round table talk that there's a couple, at least one Navy guy that a little bit of a surprise didn't get a combine invite there. But we obviously have a great conversation coming up with our annual round table with those peeps that went to the both the Shrine Bowl and Senior Bowl, as you mentioned. And I think it's about an hour long. We cover a lot of position groups, a lot of names as usual, so that hopefully will be entertaining to the masses.
With combine invites, naturally come combine snubs. And as you said, we'll talk to Josh Carney, Joe Clark, Melanie Friedlander, and Ross McCorkle in just a little bit. Dave, let's get to the couple of Steelers matters right now and talked about on the Monday show, the cryptic tweet that Cameron Heyward had sent out on Sunday. It was a book closing, and so some made the logical connection of a chapter closing. Could that mean that he's potentially ending his NFL career or time in Pittsburgh? Heyward had his Not Just Football podcast on Wednesday go up and clarified those comments and said that was not related to his own future, but just closing the chapter on the 2025-2026 NFL season. So has not committed one way or another publicly about his future plans, but that GIF, as it often is the case, was misinterpreted by fans, although it was reasonable. I mean, I understood why people interpreted it that way. That was my first thought too, but it was not a commentary on Heyward's future.
Yeah, that's why I was very careful to say it's one way or the other. I've been wrong as many times as maybe, or more times than I've been right with trying to decipher some of those cryptic tweets and all like that. So, yeah, and I think we even brought up the idea. Maybe that's Cam Heyward just closing the book on the season with the Super Bowl coming and going along those lines there. So I don't think that was maybe as noteworthy as what Joey Porter Sr. had to say about Ben Roethlisberger, though, right?
Yeah, Joey Porter Sr. going pretty hard in the paint at Big Ben. That was on Heyward's podcast and was certainly the most notable comment that he made, and just said that, quote, "Do I love my quarterback? Yeah. But is he a good person? No." Later said he was not a good teammate. Just says, quote, "But the person, he's just not a good teammate. He knows that. Anybody in the Steeler building knows that. I've only won one Super Bowl, and that was my quarterback. So do I love my quarterback? Yeah. But is he a good person? No," end quote. Now, Porter and Ben were teammates together for those early years where Ben was, I think pretty much, and he probably even would admit this, pretty immature and had a lot of growing up to do. So maybe that's the perception. But of course, Porter worked on staff later during Ben's later years. So interesting commentary and certainly very candid, honest, and harsh from Joey Porter Sr.
Yeah, with the Steelers Newswire really slowed down at this point as we wait for more of the coaching staff hires to be made official coming out of obviously the Super Bowl week, and the All-Star games are over with, and we're in that lull between now and the Combine starting. This is going to end up being pretty big news, his comments on Ben Roethlisberger. Now, I don't believe Ben Roethlisberger had an episode of his podcast that that normally drops on Tuesday. It'll be interesting to see during that next episode. Hard to imagine Ben missing these comments by Joey Porter Sr. So I'm willing to bet we'll be tuned in to see if Ben Roethlisberger rebuttals what Joey Porter Sr. had to say on Cameron Heyward's podcast here. But that's probably going to be one of the bigger stories making the rounds on the interwebs today.
Do you have a problem when players make these kind of waves, or do you appreciate the honesty and candor and nothing beyond just the general platitudes that players are kind of coached to, or former players are coached to say, so they don't make those waves? How do you come in on Porter being so transparent?
Yes. Look, I don't know what I appreciate the honesty, and Lord knows you don't, Joey Porter Sr.'s never been afraid to speak his mind on any subject and all. I don't know what this gets you, especially with Joey Porter Sr. recently coming out and basically begging for a coaching, spot on the new coaching staff and all like that. I don't know how that's going to help him with kind of the he said, she said kind of stuff there. So I sit in both. I sit in both seats when it comes to it. Yeah, you like hearing the good and spicy type stuff and people speaking their minds, especially of yesteryear. But on the flip side, you kind of wince and say, well, what good's going to come? Because, look, this is going to blow up and it already has on social media. And I imagine in online stories, and look, we wrote about it first thing this morning as well too. So I just don't know what's good's going to come out of it, and at this point too, you would expect Ben to rebuttal this in some way, shape, or form.
Right, which will then make it a news story again. Ben responds to the Porter comments, and the cycle goes on. Obviously, this is pretty aggressive and not the tack that I personally would take, but I like when guys are honest and transparent. They don't give the cookie cutter boilerplate answers that tell you exactly how they feel and give you an honest and straightforward answer. So it is heavy and unexpected for Porter to be that aggressive about it, but I like when players wear their emotions on their sleeve and tell it like it is, at least in the way that they perceive and view it. So I give props to Porter for that.
Yeah. And, we'll be talking more over this next year about Ben Roethlisberger being a first ballot potential Hall of Famer. And I imagine at some point Ben will start addressing that at some point as well, too. So anyway, interesting morning when it comes to the Cam Heyward podcast.
Definitely. All right, Dave, some other things you wrote about, we talked about on the site this week. You have an important date, a deadline on Jalen Ramsey. We've discussed his future, and is there a future for Jalen Ramsey in Pittsburgh? It's a big salary he's going to be owed here in 2026. So what is decision date, and what all will go into deciding does Ramsey stay or go?
Yeah, and first and foremost, usually by this time of the offseason, I like to have my first initial salary cap update, kind of state of the union when it comes to that aspect of the team. But there has been a lot of kind of murkiness that I've needed to work through when it comes to Jalen Ramsey's actual contract, what his cap number actually is, what it could be, and all of that's associated with the way the Steelers have dealt with the option bonuses since acquiring him in a trade with the Miami Dolphins last year. I got back with Joe Corey again in the last 24 hours to get even more clarity when it comes to what Ramsey's cap number was last year, what it technically is on paper right now, and what it potentially could be. And then obviously, as I wrote around, the key date, at least one of the key dates when it comes to Ramsey and an offseason decision when it comes to that. Now look, March 13th. Is the date that the $2 million roster bonus, I believe, is due to be paid to Jalen Ramsey. The other aspect of this is what technically is his cap number right now, and potentially what could it be. Joe Corey, and I Joel Corey evidently thought I was asking a different question when I first relayed this information. I think last week sometime. He tells me technically Ramsey's salary cap charge right now for 2026 is $17.229 million. There is the $7.4 million option bonus decision that the Steelers have with Jalen Ramsey and that's not till very late in August, I believe. And basically what they need to decide is how they're going to exercise that and whether or not they're going to prorate it. If the Steelers basically decline what's called declining the option bonus, and that 7.4 million goes over in and adds on to his base salary, which right now is scheduled to be 10 million. So his base salary would go from 10 million to 17.4 million. I wrote about this last offseason and got pushed back and then was told was wrong, was told was right again. They did evidently prorate the option bonus last year. So there is proration in 2026 based on that move, a little over 3 million as far as that goes. He does have a $100,000 workout bonus in his contract this year. Long story short, if the Steelers decide not to exercise the option bonus in August, assuming he's still on the roster, then Ramsey's cap number would jump from 17.229 million to 23.149 million. Now, don't get lost in what the cap number is or could be, because we're going to get a lot more clarity about if he's on the roster or not past March 13th. Another interesting aspect about the March 13th date when it comes to Ramsey is, I believe, 3.5 million of the at least $10 million base salary that Ramsey is scheduled to earn right now is scheduled to become fully guaranteed on March 13th. So now here's the thing: even if that number becomes that 3.5 million of the base salary becomes fully guaranteed, you could still trade that away and not be on the hook for it. Whatever team would acquire him via trade would obviously be on the hook for the guaranteed portion of the base salary. Now, if the Steelers were to keep him past March 13th and end up cutting him before the or after March 13th, they obviously would have paid the $2 million roster bonus at that point, and then that $3.5 million guaranteed of the base salary would be fully guaranteed as well too. Now, I would imagine that part of that $3.5 million would be have some offset language related to it should another team wind up signing him, after he was cut there. But the bigger picture aspect, cap number aside and option bonus decision a decision later on in the offseason, there is what Jalen Ramsey is technically scheduled to earn in cash in 2026. And right now that number, and I believe I said that the other day, is 19.5 million. So don't worry about, the cap number is not what the decision is going to be based on. The decision is with this team, is Jalen Ramsey worth 19.5 million in cash in 2026? And we will, I think, get our answer to that by March 13th. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, can they trade Ramsey? Can they do this? I just don't know. In my opinion, it does not feel that Ramsey contract at his age, I think he'll be 32 in October, not the hugest producer as far as negative plays goes, specifically interceptions and pass breakups. The little uncertainty. I mean, is this guy can he still play corner in the NFL? Is he really a safety now at this point? I just don't know that a team's going to be willing to take on that contract without the Steelers having to eat some of it there. So I think March 13th is the day to circle on the calendar. If he makes it past March 13th, it feels like at that point that he will be a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers in 2026. And then obviously we'll see how the Steelers handle that option bonus and what his cap number winds up being. Now, if the Steelers were to cut him outright before March 13th, I would imagine that decision would obviously come before March 13th, but it would come right after the start of the new league year, which I believe is March 11th. And why that? Well, because of the proration that happened last offseason due to the option bonus and all, they could specifically, if they cut him after March 11th, but before March 13th, they obviously avoid the roster bonus, and then they could potentially designate Jalen Ramsey as a post-June 1st cut, which would lessen the dead money hit in 2026. However, it would create a larger dead money charge in 2027 because of the acceleration to June 1st. Now, if they did designate Jalen Ramsey as a post-June 1st cut, they would have to carry his full designated cap number, which right now I think technically is the 17.229 million up until June 1st, until that technically that cut would go into effect there. So I think if you're listening to this and the overarching thought on Jalen Ramsey right now, where the main conversation should be, is Jalen Ramsey worth 19.5 million in 2026? That's the overarching question here. And as far as cash expenditures go for 2026 on the books right now, he would have the third highest amount on the team behind TJ Watt, and who was the other one on here? DK Metcalf at $25 million in cash. So let me just put the question out to you. Is Jalen Ramsey worth $19.5 million, regardless of position, for 2026?
I mean, we've had the discussion before. I think to a dollar amount, no, he's not. But then there's the cost of what do you have to invest in replacing Jalen Ramsey should you cut him, because there is no plan B, nobody on the roster to assume Ramsey's free safety role. So what is the net difference in terms of you go try to sign somebody in free agency? What is your cost of capital in a draft pick? You're going to still draft regardless, because if Ramsey does come back, you would think that 2026 is very much his last year in Pittsburgh. You talked about what other teams could have interest, but the market, you would imagine, would be very thin. There was a lot of speculation he was going to go to the Rams after Miami was shopping him last offseason, reunite with Sean McVay and the good relationship they have there, but I don't know how tenable that is. They just paid Quentin Lake a bunch of money, I think the Rams did, so I don't know if that's gonna fit well or not, but I'm still of the belief Ramsey will be kept. I'm not going to certainly take that to the bank. I still give it that kind of 65-35 yes kept to 35% no kept odds. Whatever it's worth, Trey Dulac seemed to intimate that he believes Ramsey will stick around for one more season, but we'll see obviously on that March 13th deadline.
And obviously Ramsey could just, I doubt this happens, but he could just say, I want out of here.
Sure.
In typical kind of Jalen Ramsey fashion. Is Jalen Ramsey a guy that you go to and ask to take a pay cut? And what would he think of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something you could do, but I don't think he'd be receptive to that. But if you're Ramsey, he could ask, cut me, but would he get that kind of money on the open market? I don't know if he would, at least not all right away. So he's got to be able to see what's in his best interest financially too. So we'll see. You could try the pay cut. That would be the ideal thing if he shaves off, $5+ million. And this is a team that apparently once asked Cam Heyward to take a pay cut. So if they're willing to ask Heyward to take a pay cut, they're probably willing to ask Ramsey to do the same. I imagine the answer from Ramsey will be the same as Heyward. No, thank you, but we'll see.
And if Ramsey said, I want out of here, it'd be under the assumption that at least he could earn close to 19.5 million in cash, stay with another team with, let's say, a base salary and a signing bonus. If let's say it was a 2-year or 3-year deal, could he come close to at least 19.5 million in earnings, even though it wouldn't technically be, it would be broken down a lot different. It'd be a base salary plus a signing bonus, and assuming he signed a multi-year deal. Now, I think without a doubt, Jalen Ramsey intends on playing at least one more year and maybe even a couple at this point right now. Now, a lot of people, and obviously we'll point to that. I think quarterback rating, at least when targeted to him. Now, depending on what you view as targets and who you trust as far as closest defender, and was it man versus zone, and all that conversation there. But he wasn't technically great in coverage as a whole over there. Now, he did register 88 total tackles in 2025, and I believe that tied his single season high in a stat for his career. But also, as unfortunately, you don't want your safeties having to make a lot of tackles, as we talked about a couple of years ago with Minkah Fitzpatrick there. But this is a guy that's still a heavy hitter. And then there's the whole leader, the whole mentorship aspect with Joey Porter Jr. and maybe whoever else might come into this team as a younger player this year. And how much value do you put on Ramsey's experience as a mentor?
Yeah, and I still contend that Ramsey can be a better safety in year 2. That coverage stat is partial corner, I think, and partial safety production, and obviously had a tough time at corner. The Bengals game, that upset loss on that Thursday night primetime game, is a good example of that, where he was really poor, as the whole secondary was that game. So I think in a full off season where he can really hone his craft, not make that mid-season switch to safety, would be beneficial for him. So we'll see. What are your quick thoughts? Do you think he stays? Do you think he goes?
I think I have bounced around both ways on this, trying to think this thing all the way through and try to look at kind of comparative values around the league and try to take into account, like you said, could he still grow and become a better free safety if he did that more full time? He's right in that area where it is kind of questionable overall. I think he is a good mentor to Joey Porter Jr. I think he's still got at least a year of football left in him. I do wonder, though, if you're the Steelers, if you did keep him, I think you would try to take the full brunt of that $7.4 million option bonus. In other words, don't create more dead money for yourself moving forward. But, the cap continues to rise, and what you push off for dead money now ends up being more benefit later as the cap continues to increase. So I don't think.
Yeah, shouldn't teams? Oh, sorry, but shouldn't all teams basically embrace that? Because it's not about the money; it's about the percentage of cap that dead money occupies. And as the cap continues to skyrocket, that percentage becomes smaller and smaller. And that's the focus in terms of what dead money is and how much that impacts your team and your roster.
Right, a dead money dollar is worth becomes less harmful in the future than it does today.
Exactly.
So that's why if they did cut him, I would imagine they would probably do so between right after the start of the new league year and obviously before the March 13th $2 million roster. Now, look, you could just as easily pay that $2 million roster bonus and decide to maybe cut him later. It's just
just bad practice.
It is bad practice. How do you deem that contract, assuming the Steelers did not have to eat any money to deal him, as tradable?
No, not really. For a team to take that on for a 30-something-year-old safety who's certainly near the end of his career, 1 or 2 years left in all likelihood, no, it's not really a tradable contract.
I would agree there. So I would probably go. I'd probably lean along you. I think 60-40. I would lean towards keeping him. I just, look, I think we will get our decision by March 13th. And if he is still on this roster after March 13th and after paying that $2 million roster bonus, I would feel I would feel comfortable in saying he's going to be on this 2026 team. So yeah, once again, 2 million is not a lot, but it is at least a trigger date. And then also when you think about the fact that 3.5 million of his base salary becomes fully guaranteed on that date as well, too. We'll definitely see where the Steelers value him at, whether they think he is worth $19.5 million cash. Now, this team, I think cap wise, people will see, and cash wise, they'll be fine in keeping him. It's just a matter, is the player worth the money?
Right. And what is Pittsburgh's bigger picture plans? How aggressive do they want to be in free agency? If they plan on taking a step back, then maybe they're more willing to hold on to Ramsey because they're not going to spend that money elsewhere. If they're plan on being more aggressive, or if there is a free agent they really do like, then that could change things as well. So good information, good to get some finality on that. And that should mean your salary cap post will be coming up here in the near
Very
future.
soon. Yeah, because I wanted to get this put to bed here. The question becomes, what should I list Ramsey's initial cap number at in my update? Now, I will explain it out whichever way I end up going with this, but let's assume the Steelers keep Ramsey, uh, and want to keep him in the 2026 season. When you get to that option bonus date of whether or not you want to prorate that out, uh, do you think, you know, do you want the extra, let's say, I guess it turns out to almost $6 million. Would you like that extra $6 million in cap space now? Or would you want to try to eat the full brunt of I'll cut to the chase here. I'm going to list his cap number, assuming they don't prorate it out at 23.149 million. And that way, and then I'll put a caveat in there and an explanation that it could be as low as 17.229 million if the Steelers decide to prorate out that 7.4 million option bonus. But the good thing is that at least give people an idea that there's $6 million of cap space additionally to play with. Now, a lot of people say, well, why doesn't that match like over the cap at 19.5 million? It's because I don't know why they've leaned on 19.5 million specifically, perhaps because that's the cash that he's about to earn this coming season. But the reality of the matter is that cap number could be 17.229 million, or it could be as high as 23.149 million, depending on how they handle that 7.4 option bonus later in August. But all that information comes updated according to Joe Corey in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, for all of his expertise and insight. And the question on do you want that extra 6 million or not is really, I mean, I see the value in kicking that can down the road because of the cap going up. But the question really becomes, do you need that money now or not? If you feel like you want to use that cap space as your in-season buffer, or if you have other moves you may intend to make, or what kind of your plan is for your cash and cap, then you want to maybe free up that money. If not, then maybe you don't. So it just kind of depends on your situation. Again, these things are not made in a vacuum. They're based on all the factors. What does the big picture look like? What does your salary cap health look like? What is your plan for the year? Those things all create your decisions on which way do we go.
All right, let's throw it out to the listeners here. The Terrible Podcast at gmail.com. Just looking at Jalen Ramsey from a cash expenditure only. Don't worry about the cap number. Is Jalen Ramsey worth 19.5 million?
Didn't we ask that a week ago?
Maybe we did, but I don't think we got a lot of response on it. I think it happened right before the Super Bowl and all. So we'll just throw it out one more time if anybody wants to chime in on that.
All right, good deal. That was basically all the Steelers news, so pretty quiet until I'm sure 8 seconds after Dave and I get off the podcast, and then I'm sure more news will happen. Dave, I know the Super Bowl is over. We're kind of in a bit of a quieter point in the sports calendar, but you got pitchers, catchers reporting, the Pens going on, the Olympics going on, of course, right now. Who can forget about that? So let's hear from our friends over at MyBookie.
All right, that stretch where football's winding down, fight nights keep rolling on, and you still want action to bet on every night? Well, that's February, and that's where my bookie really shines. I'll bet the game, sure, but once they're over with, I slide right on over to their casinos and keep it moving. They've got slots, live dealers, blackjack, roulette, same account, all in one place. You can find that at my bookie. There's always something going on, too. They have cash drops, slot tournaments, live dealer jackpots. You log in, and there is action waiting on you. And look, as the draft gets closer, there'll be props and all to be betting on. When it comes to that, the NHL season will resume after the Olympics are over. NBA basketball is in full swing right now, and NCAA basketball gets closer to March March and March Madness, and obviously you can bet on that at MyBookie as well too. That's why I keep telling people MyBookie just isn't for game day. It's built for late nights and that post Super Bowl hangover that you might have. Now, head over to mybookie.ag now and use our promo code TERRIBLE. That code gives you a 300% deposit match up to $750. So you've got plenty to play with if you do that now. Once again, head over to mybookie.ag. Use promo code TERRIBLE. That code gives you a 300% first deposit match up to $750. So you've got plenty of money to play with in your account as we get further into February. Sports or casino, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. And we appreciate them once again being a sponsor of the Terrible Podcast.
Definitely. All right, Dave, let's get to our Depot Roundtable, recapping everything that happened a couple of weeks ago at the Shrine Bowl in Frisco, Texas, and the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. Got a great group that was down there again. Just Mel, Josh, Joe, and Ross. Want to shout them out where you guys can follow them on Twitter to find more of their coverage. You can follow Josh on Twitter at by Josh Carney. You can follow Mel on Twitter at Girl Surgeon. You can follow Ross on Twitter at Ross_McCorkle, and you can follow Joe on Twitter at JClark1233. Dave, let's take a pause and come back with the gang. And welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. As we talked about, Dave and I, on the Monday show, wanted to get the crew together for the Steelers Depot All-Star Game Draft Roundtable. We had a bunch of people down there for the Shrine Bowl in Frisco and had Ross McCorkle down in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, so wanted to get their perspective and hear from somebody else other than Dave and myself. So appreciate all the great work you guys did with the coverage, from practice notes to interviews to feature stories, some really good stuff down there. So thank you guys so much. I'll start with Ross here and just kind of a 30,000-foot view. It's there's someone new in charge of the Senior Bowl, right, Ross? And so how different was this experience compared to seasons past?
Yeah, I thought it was quite a bit different in terms of media access and the way things were run. I mean, the most obvious change was moving practice back. It used to be starting in the morning and it would end in kind of the early afternoon. This year, everything was bumped back a couple of hours. And so the last practice was actually ending as the sun was down. And so it was happening during that cold snap. And so it was almost like two entirely different climates at that outside practice. The first practice with the sun in your face was pretty warm. And the second practice, which was the American team, they were in like near freezing temperatures by the end of the day. And so that was one of the big changes. I thought the media access was a little bit different. There's the media lunch that happens every year. And this time it was just run slightly differently. They rolled the quarterbacks out in one group, and then players just kind of, it seemed to be kind of random when players were showing up and leaving. It was supposed to be structured like national team this time, American team this time. I think we didn't even get access to the national team defense because they were in some meeting. And so, usually in past years, you had full access. The entire American team was there for an hour. The entire national team was there for an hour. And so a little bit different, definitely working out some kinks. But I thought overall they ran a good operation down there.
And
Ross, real quick, why all the secrecy with the measurements? And the second thing is, how many guys was there? Wasn't there a large group of guys that ended up not playing in the game?
Yeah, I think definitely the Shrine Bowl had a larger group of guys, and I'm sure they'll talk about that didn't end up playing in the game. But I don't know why the measurements. Usually usually we have those pretty early on, and it seemed like there was a couple websites out there that had them, but I didn't see anything that was officially issued. And I know that they did it differently this year. They measured them as they showed up and checked in. It was like more of an informal kind of process. Usually they had like a time and day where, everybody would show up and do that. This time they did it as they entered. And so I don't know if it was just, I don't really have a great guess, but I know that there was some kind of different operation there.
All right.
Should thank you, especially Ross, because you were making the trip from Nashville driving right after that ice storm and you lost power and there were trees down in the neighborhood. So appreciate you making it all work. Let's get to one more question to Ross and I'll get to the Shrine Bowl crew. Just was Lee Hunter, the D lineman from Texas Tech, was he the best player in Mobile this week or last week, whenever it was?
Yeah, I'd say so. I watched offensive and defensive line more particularly on the first day of practice, and that was the best Senior Bowl practice I think I've ever seen. And I guess this was my fourth year now going down there. Seen quite a few good practices, and Lee Hunter stands on top of them all. I think he was completely unblockable. He just stands out. His body type. He's massive. He's thick. Compact, and a guy that big able to burst through the line like he was completely unblockable in the one-on-one drills, and sometimes the defense kind of has a little bit of an advantage, I think, in those one-on-one drills, so you like to see that transfer over into the team period. And lo and behold, it made it almost impossible to evaluate some of the other position groups in the team period because Lee Hunter was just in the backfield immediately every time, being told, hey, you can't touch the quarterback, stuff like that. So, yeah, he was dominant.
All right, Lee Hunter, I think measured in, according to some sites out there, 6'3.5", 320 pounds, 9-inch hands, and 34.25 inch arms. Is he primarily a nose?
Yeah, he was playing more, between like 2 and 0 tech kind of stuff at Senior Bowl, but I think he could flex out, and probably 4-eye might be a bit of a stretch, but I think he could play pretty much anywhere across the defensive front.
All right. Let's see. Let's shift over to the Shrine Bowl people here with Joe, Mel, and Josh. Wide receivers a huge topic when it comes to Steeler fans in this year's draft. Obviously, expect them to take one, if not maybe two, and who knows with 12 picks if they end up holding on to those. I doubt we'll see three, but possibly at least two. We'll start with Mel in this one because she likes to, I know, focus on wide receivers, running backs, and quarterbacks quite a bit. Mel, talk about some of your standout wide receivers at the Shrine Bowl this year, and I think one of them only practiced just a little bit before shutting it down.
Yeah, so one of the stars of the first day was University of Connecticut Skylar Bell. He started his career at Wisconsin and was a small fish in a big bowl, so he spent his last 2 years with the Huskies. Had a phenomenal season his final year with them, and I was excited to see him. He had an amazing practice the first day and then made a business decision and shut it down. But for anyone watching practice the first day, his footwork, his ability to get separation, his hands, he's the complete package. And while he's not the biggest receiver, and I don't know how he'll do with contested catches, he knows how to read the defenses and find those soft spots. And I think he's just going to do very well at the NFL level.
Why do you suppose he shut it down? Just coming off of that good day, nothing else to really prove there, or what?
Absolutely. And he admitted that to me as much. That was a business decision. He didn't want to risk injury. So he basically spent the rest of the week on the sideline.
All right. Let's see. Where did he predominantly play? Trying to look up where he predominantly lined up. Looked like he mixed in slot and out wide. It was predominantly a wide, lined up out wide at UConn this past season, but he did get some work in the slot. So he is a versatile guy that can line up inside and outside. Was he able to get off in that one practice? Was he doing well getting off whatever press drills they had?
He really was. He was winning his one-on-ones, and in team sessions, he was getting separation easily off the line. I think he's going to be an exceptional route runner. He's a very intelligent player, extremely confident, composed. He's not someone that DBs are going to get under his skin.
All right. Who else at wide receiver for you at the Shrine Bowl?
So there were a couple standouts. The winner of the week, without exception, was Iowa's Caden Wetjen. And he was giving us Efton Chisholm vibes from the very first day. And he's a smaller guy, speedy, gets open on every play, reliable hands. There were very few defenders that could beat him in one-on-ones. And, he excelled in the Shrine Bowl game as well. He's going to be someone that will bring tremendous value to whatever team drafts him. One of my personal favorites was Dylan Bell out of Georgia. And he is sort of billed as a running back slash wide receiver. He's played both in college, but I think he's going to be a wide receiver at the NFL level. Um, he didn't get a lot of attention at Georgia because the starting wide receiver obviously got a majority of the snaps. But Bell has good footwork, runs nice routes, is explosive off the line, is big enough to be physical at the catch point, can certainly out jump a lot of DBs, and was just the most consistent person throughout the week, I thought, for his team.
All right, Joe and Josh. We'll start with Joe. A couple of wide receivers, maybe that Mel didn't hit on that caught your eye, or maybe a couple that you thought more about going into the week that didn't do as well.
Yeah, so I think Weekend was the clear standout, from Iowa. I mean, he was incredible, but other guys that stood out to me, Anthony Smith from East Carolina was a late addition, but his route running was really impressive. He had a couple nice contested catches. I was super surprised by him coming in late. He didn't play in the game, which is a little bit of a bummer, but when he did practice, he was a guy that I was consistently watching. Same goes for BYU's Chase Roberts. He's a bit of a bigger body, but he's got the speed to separate from defenders. Went up and got a couple of balls. He was pretty solid in one-on-ones. Not many guys were able to stick with him. And then another guy that I thought had a pretty interesting week was Montana's Michael Wortham. I dinged him in my practice notes the first few days because he would run a really great route and then wouldn't be able to catch the ball. But as the week went on, his hands got a little bit better. He had a big kick return in the Shrine Bowl game itself, and I thought he was somebody that really just flashed with his speed, his suddenness, and just his ability to separate, the top of his routes. And the drop problem, I think, is something that could certainly still be there. I saw it enough that I red flagged it, but he was somebody that I stood out definitely more than I thought because he was also a guy that was added a little bit late as well.
All right, Chase Roberts, I think, was one of the taller wide receivers at the Shrine Bowl this year. 6'3", 1'8", 216 pounds. And who was the other one you talked about? The Montana kid, Wortham, was probably one of the smaller wide receivers, I think, there at the Shrine Bowl. 5'8" and a quarter, 182 pounds there. Just so people get a reference on some height and weight there. Brother Josh, how about some wide receivers that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, the one guy that consistently showed up throughout the week in a quiet fashion was J. Michael Sturdivant from Florida. He previously had been at UCLA, transferred to Florida this past year, had a quiet year in the SEC, but showed up at the Shrine Bowl, really just started to make plays. He was open consistently. I know that the quarterbacks were having a tough time putting catchable balls on him at times. But day 2 and day 3 of practice, he really started to consistently pull down the football in contested catch situations. Didn't really do much in the game, but that's a guy that I kind of circled as for later in this draft process to go and kind of take a deep dive on because he's that big guy. He's not going to create a ton of separation, but he plays through contact well. He has really good hands. The one guy I was disappointed that I didn't get to see at all, and I talked to him the first day before practices started, was Kansas's Emmanuel Henderson Jr. He was a first-team All-Big 12 kick returner. He was at Alabama, originally started as a running back at Alabama, but then transitioned to receiver. Went to Kansas for this past year. Is a big-time playmaker, a ton of speed, and then showed up at the Shrine Bowl, did interviews, and then never practiced. And that was a little disappointing, and that seemed to kind of set the tone for the rest of the week, not just in the receiver room, but for the entire roster. And the one guy that showed up, I believe, Joe and Mel can correct me on this, but I think Chris Hilton Jr. from LSU showed up on Saturday, I think was his first practice. Another height, weight, speed guy. Has questionable hands, but man, that guy can fly. And then I was really impressed with the work he did on special teams as a gunner in the game. Consistently was winning downfield, getting there, forcing fair catches. So that's a guy that I'd kind of circled. And I know he made headlines a couple years ago when Brian Kelly kind of was going after him on the sideline. And if you guys saw the John Boy Media clip where Kelly was asking him, "Why do you keep jumping?" That was Chris Hilton Jr. And fortunately, he didn't jump at all during the Shrine Bowl. That was an improvement. But that's a guy that I have circled as a late round guy that just absolutely flies at the receiver position.
All right, real quick to the three of you at the Shrine Bowl, who are probably the most likely the top three wide receivers to come off the draft board in a couple of months from now? I would imagine Skylar Bell would probably be near or at the top of all three of your lists there. But Mel, top three likely to come off the board.
Obviously, Skylar Bell is going to be the first guy off the board. Beyond that, I guess it just depends on what teams are on the flavor and what teams are looking for. It's interesting just to comment very quickly on Chase Roberts. He blew everyone away on the first day and then was sort of quiet the rest of the week and unfortunately didn't play in the Shrine Bowl. But I think he's going to be probably a second day pick. And then someone's going to get lucky with him.
All right, Joe, top three you think coming out likely to come off the board wide receiver?
Yeah, I think Bell, I think Chase Roberts, and then I wouldn't have said this coming into the week, but I do think that Wajen could find his way sneaky on, somewhere earlier in day 3 than I thought. I thought coming into the week he was probably round 7 priority free agent, but I think some team's going to take him. I mean, he's got 7 return touchdowns in his career, so he's providing you value there. I mean, he didn't show off much as a receiver at Iowa, but given what he showed this week, there's value in getting the ball in his hands and just letting him work in space. So I do think that somebody could take a chance on him in, maybe the early 5th, maybe even the late 4th. So I could see him coming off the board as one of the top 3 receivers.
All right, Josh, Skylar Bell on top of your list, and who's after?
Yeah, Skylar Bell's at the top. Wetjen's right there at number 2 for me. I actually think he might go earlier, just with the way that the game is transitioning more towards importance on special teams and new kickoff return rules. It would not shock me if he's a late day 2 guy with his ability to return the football. And then, I mean, it's really just flavor of the month at that point. I would say. I'll go off topic here. I'll go Eric Rivers, Georgia Tech. He had a really good year for the Yellow Jackets. Had a nice productive week. Inside outside guy. So there's a name that we kind of didn't mention, but I could see him being the third guy in this group.
All right, Ross, Senior Bowl wide receivers. Give us some rundown on some of the top guys.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about here. I think the receivers and the defensive linemen were the 2 strongest groups, and there were quite a few receivers that stood out. Entering the week, the top names were Malachi Fields, Jacoby Lane. Unfortunately, Casey Concepcion did not show up. I was really looking forward to watching him. But a lot of big body guys in Mobile, 6'2", 6'4", type of receivers. And I thought, as far as Lane and Fields went, Malachi Fields, they kind of had opposite experiences. I thought Malachi Fields stood out and showed what he needed to. He was, a smooth route runner. He made probably the catch of the week when Taylon Green threw a, let's just say, on-brand wild pass, and Malachi Fields had to adjust to it and dive and caught it for a very deep, what would have been a touchdown. It was in practice, but Malachi Fields stood out in a big way. I thought Jacoby Lane, on the other hand, unfortunately, kind of disappointed a little bit. I won't say he had a terrible week, but he just didn't stand out, and he really should have in that kind of setting. I thought he dropped a couple of passes that didn't make a ton of sense, some concentration drops, I thought, and so you don't want to see that in the practice setting. I don't really think he did too much in the game either, if he even played. So no redemption for him there. Ted Hurst was one of the big stories of the week out of Georgia State. He actually played his first 2 seasons at Valdosta State, transferred to Georgia State after a strong junior year. He had, I think people were kind of speculating that he would enter the transfer portal and go to one of the top programs in the country and be, maybe one of their best receivers. He stayed at Georgia State and wanted to make a legacy for himself there. I think he's, I forget his exact measurements, but somewhere in the ballpark of 6'2". I don't know how fast he's going to run, but I think it should be pretty fast. He's one of those guys that kind of glides up to top speed. You barely notice that he's even accelerating, and before you know it, he's blowing past cornerbacks. He also made a pretty incredible catch, one-handed, for a touchdown in practice on the first day. I don't know if he necessarily had like the most even performance throughout the week. I think day one was definitely his best day, and he didn't like wow the rest of the days. But I think he showed what he needed to at his size and his type of college production, and what he showed on the first day of practice. I think he worked his way into the potential top 100, maybe even higher overall prospects. In terms of some of the smaller guys, I mean, Barion Brown out of LSU, he's maybe like more of a late round guy. I think he has some problems in his game, but he returned six. I think he returned six kickoffs for touchdowns at LSU. He didn't have as much punt return experience, but I think his skill set could easily translate to that area as well. And he was impressive in Mobile. I thought, like, just kind of looking at his draft stock after the fact, after I'd watched practice, and I'm like, where's this guy kind of, what ballpark of draft stock does this guy have? And it was way later than I would have guessed based on what I saw in Mobile. He was getting open. He was creating separation consistently at the top of his routes. He made some tough combat catches. There was maybe a benefit to having Garrett Nussmeier there, his college quarterback. So they, have that extra chemistry. So you do maybe expect him to stand out a little bit more than the rest. But I thought overall, Barion Brown was very impressive. Some other guys, Lewis Bond out of Boston College. I think he was a little bit up and down, but overall, I would say he had a plus performance. Another guy who was creating good separation. I think there was a drop or two in there that, he probably wants back. But overall, he was an interesting guy. Gosh, I'm trying to rattle off some more names here. Tyron Montgomery. I'd be remiss not to talk about him out of John Carroll. He only started playing football a few years ago. And I think I'm pretty sure he was discovered by the John Carroll staff. I didn't get a chance to speak to him, but I think he was discovered via just some like YouTube videos or something like that. They saw him running routes, on a practice field, and I think he sent his YouTube tape in, and they signed him that way. And again, this is a guy that is very raw to new to football. I thought that did show in his play at times for sure, but overall, I mean, for his level of experience, he was really giving some good cornerbacks issues. That San Diego State corner, I think, what's his name, Chris Johnson, was having issues the first day against Tyron Montgomery. Again, there were some kind of aspects of his game that were definitely raw when he would get the kind of vertical separation. He'd blow past the corner. I thought he was kind of looking back for the ball too early, not letting the kind of ball come to him, and that was slowing him down. So he was kind of giving his hard-earned separation away at times. There was definitely some rawness to his game, but Tyron Montgomery opened a lot of eyes. Maybe one of the biggest risers, just because, I don't really know how well-known he was at all entering the week.
And could he join Pittsburgh, where there's Tom Arth, John Carroll alum? Ross, to stick with you, to switch positions, though, quarterback obviously top of mind. There is no clear standout, name there probably in Mobile. A lot of guys trying to jockey for that second, third tier at the position. When I talk about two guys in particular, you mentioned them both. Taylon Green from Arkansas, really athletic, toolsy upside, but can he find consistency for a guy that's played a lot of football? And Garrett Nussmeier, who was expected to be a top quarterback for the 2026 draft, had a tough 2025 season, got benched late in the year. Sounds like he had a good week, though, healthy now, too. What were your thoughts on those two guys?
Yeah, I'll start with Taylon Green. You look at his physical skill set and just his intangibles, his measurements. It's like he was built in a lab. I was hoping that he was going to stand out in the practice setting. Unfortunately, he has a tendency to immediately drop his eyes and immediately run anytime there's any sign of danger. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of danger in the backfield with defensive linemen at the Senior Bowl, and so he was just dropping his eyes and running a lot. And I don't think that's what anyone really wanted to see from him. I think we all know he can run. We wanted to see, can he stand in there and deliver passes, especially in a protected environment where he's not going to get hit. He shouldn't feel like he's in danger. If there's a time to maybe show off the arm a little bit more, it was in Mobile, and he didn't do that. And when he did do that, it was wildly inconsistent. I would say, I think it was 2 years ago, Joe Milton was in Mobile, and he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, I'll say. Balls were skipping off the ground. Balls were, several yards wide of his target. And I thought Taylon Green even looked worse than what Milton did a couple years ago. With his arm, it was wildly inconsistent. There were some times where, like, okay, he didn't drop his eyes. He's navigating the pocket. It all looked good because he has that great footwork and speed and stuff. He could evade pressure. And, there was an off-platform throw that he made, and it was that one to Malachi Fields that I was talking about earlier. And I think some people looked at that throw and they're like, wow, look at the potential that Taylon Green has, because look at that deep completion, and he, evaded pressure and got the ball downfield. I really think that was more of an impressive thing for Malachi Fields.
Yeah, that was not a well-thrown ball. That was not a well-thrown ball by Green.
Yeah. So, overall, I'd say very disappointed in Taylon Green. Did not see anything that made me think, there was starting NFL potential from him. Definitely a developmental guy. Moving to Garrett Nussmeier, I think definitely the most intriguing prospect entering the week, just because of, before the season, he was viewed as a potential first-round guy, maybe even the top guy in the class. And he fell off a cliff. And so you had to ask the question, why? Excuse me. And I think he addressed that pretty well before the event. In his opening press conference, he said that, it wasn't until like a month or two ago that he found out what was even wrong with his body. And it was like some abdomen injury that may or may not have required surgery. They didn't end up going that route, and he ended up playing through it. And, I think there are times in the pre-draft process where you can point to an injury and kind of blame everything on it. And so you need to be careful with Garrett Nussmeier and not completely absolve him of the poor season he just had. But if there is an injury that's going to affect a quarterback, it's that kind of abdomen core area. You're twisting your body a lot. And so that certainly is an excuse, or at least some context to why he had a poor season. And I thought he looked really good in Mobile to kind of help to turn that narrative around a little bit, at least. I think day 1 maybe was a little shaky. Day 2 was getting better. Day 3, I thought he was great. And then, of course, he ended up winning the MVP of the actual game. So I think scouts like to see that progress from day to day. I think he showed it. He was by far the most consistent in terms of actually throwing on target passes. He was one of the only ones that was able to at the event. And, I think he showed some of that escapability in the pocket and footwork, and, where other guys were dropping their eyes and running. He did some of that too. I think all of them did, but I think he was more diligent about making sure he was keeping his eyes up and actually, doing his job as a passer first.
Josh, to jump to you, stick with quarterbacks. It can be tough environment for these guys to stand out, new teammates, new system and scheme. But you had Mark Gronowski from Iowa on your winners list from South Dakota State, the 1 year at Iowa. What made him impressive at the Shrine Bowl?
He just showed up and he was completely in control from the first day, the Wilson throwing experience. They were throwing on air, but it was, measuring the velocity on the balls, how tight the spirals were, all of that. He just showed up and he was confident from the get-go. I think having gone through that experience of transferring and having to learn a new offense and create chemistry with new receivers kind of gave him a leg up in that sense. But I think at the end of the day, it was just football for him, and he let his talents show. And I think he really stood out above some of those bigger names that were there, like a Cade Klubnik or a Baron Morton or Jalen Daniels. I was really impressed with Gronowski's arm. Going back and watching his tape at Iowa last year, the arm that showed up at the Shrine Bowl wasn't really what was on tape. There were a lot of throws that he wasn't really driving. But that week in Frisco, the arm talent was real. It was very intriguing with him. He made all the throws. He was smart with the football. The same couldn't be said for some other quarterbacks that I'm sure we'll talk about here. But Gronowski he was in full command. And then in the game, the gamer in him came out. He threw a great block to spring Dean Connors for a touchdown at the goal line. He was willing to put his body on the line and scramble for big plays. It just, in that game, regardless of what was on the line for his future in the NFL, that gamer came out in him, and guys just rallied around him, and it was really cool to see, both in the practice setting and behind the scenes. Guys were following him around, just trying to be around him during interview sessions and all that. So that's kind of what stood out to me. He showed up and he was all business, and he really put his best foot forward.
All right, let's switch to some defensive backs. We could definitely see the Steelers potentially drafting a cornerback and even safety, maybe more of a free safety type, specifically in this year's draft. We'll start with some Shrine Bowl recon as far as those two position groups. Joe, dealer's choice. You can take either cornerback or safety to talk about a couple people, and then Josh, you take the opposite position that Joe does not handle there.
Yeah, I'll go with cornerback. A few guys caught my eye at cornerback. I think one of the bigger standouts was Oregon's Jaden Canaday. Another guy that I think was added to the roster pretty late, but he had some pedigree coming in, and he was pretty much shut down throughout the week. He had some fun battles and one-on-ones with his Oregon teammate Malik Benson. He was really, I mean, just the way he moves, his hips, his speed, the way he plays through the ball, all stood out to me there. Tyreek Chappell from Texas A&M. He's only 5'103", but so just a hair over 5'10", but he really stood out to me, and playing bigger than his size. He went up against Chase Roberts a few times. And was able to like go up and get the ball and knock it out. And in one-on-ones in general, I thought he was really sound. He made a couple of plays in team. Nebraska's Sia Wright had an interception in team drills, and he was, pretty stout throughout the week. I think coming into the week, he was supposed to be the top cornerback there, and more or less held his own. I think he was somebody that I was pretty impressed with. And then, Vanderbilt cornerback Colby Taylor, he had some issues, maybe being a little too physical, but I thought he had an okay week. Just somebody else just worth mentioning. He had a pick on off Haynes King the first day of practice that was pretty impressive. So, but yeah, I think Candidate was probably the biggest standout to me there.
And Canada going to be regarded maybe mostly as a slot prospect. I think he predominantly played in the slot last year at Oregon, but I think the year prior to that, he did play a little bit more outside. What's going to be his best fit with Canada at the NFL level?
Yeah, I think he's probably a better slot at the next level.
All right, Josh, how about some safety prospects at the Shrine Bowl?
Yeah, the one safety prospect that stands out is Cole Wisniewski from Texas Tech. 6'0", I think 214, so he's got good size there. He wasn't flashy throughout the week, but the guy was consistently around the football. He played with physicality. It showed up in the game. He's exactly what he was at Texas Tech this past season, a guy that can, play that deep safety role. He can handle some slot coverage. He's very good in the box. He's a sound tackler. And he actually transferred from North Dakota State, so he moved up a level, and he was still very good for the Red Raiders this year, and he showed that all week. Another guy, Jalen Husky, from, I believe, Maryland. He was the only one throughout the week that had any success in one-on-ones against Caden Wetjen, and that's not an exaggeration. Like, he was the only one that really had good reps against him. He had a key breakup in the end zone in their sort of 7 shots drill. In the game, he didn't do much. I know that they kind of attacked him in the passing game. He had some struggles in the game, but throughout the week in practice, he had a couple pass breakups. In team session, I believe he had an interception on the final day as well. That's a name to watch there. And then the one guy that really caught my attention early in the week and just quietly sustained it was SMU's Ahmad Moses. He's a little undersized. I believe he came in around 5'9". But that's a guy, he could play in the slot. He can play kind of that box role, even with that undersized frame. He's a physical guy, showed good ball skills. One-on-one drills, he was very fluid, was able to stay in the hip pocket. So that was a guy that really caught my attention and stood out. But outside of that, I know that, Robert Spears Jennings from Oklahoma was a big name coming in. He kind of disappointed me, didn't make any real plays. And then if I'm recalling correctly, he sat out of the game, which was a disappointment. But outside of that, there weren't a ton of safeties that really, made plays and caught my attention throughout the week besides those 3.
Mel, you got any thoughts on any of these corners or safeties coming out of the Shrine Bowl week?
There were a couple guys that impressed in practice, that are smaller guys. So if they can bulk up, between their college career and NFL, it'll be interesting to see what they can do. And that would be, um, sorry, I am in my car right now and struggling to look at my notes. Forgive me. Toledo's Andre Fuller, and also Oklahoma's Brett Austin. Both of those guys looked sharp in their one-on-ones, looked very capable in team practice and coverage. And then when you see them in there without pads, you're like, oh man, these are slight guys. But it'll be interesting to see what they do at the next level.
All right, Ross, how about corners and safeties kind of combined? And I believe what the Ohio State Igbinosun in Mobile this year.
Yeah, he was, and I thought he was one of the better corners. There was a handful of pretty good corner performances throughout the week. Igbinosun was one of them. It was kind of a quiet week for him, but um, I think his biggest issue right now is he's a little bit grabby, and so I think we're all used to seeing that with Joey Porter Jr.'s progression. But I think he has the demeanor that the Steelers like in terms of physical corners, and if he can get the grabby stuff cleaned up and maybe the penalty stuff, then this is a guy who can fit right in with the Steelers. He's certainly somebody I have my eye on. Chris Johnson, San Diego State. I thought, like I said earlier, he he was having a hard time with Tyron Montgomery, and I think Chris Johnson was some people's top corner or one of their top corners entering the week in Mobile. So when he was getting torched by Tyron Montgomery out of John Carroll, that was making people scratch their heads a little bit. But I thought he did rebound. This isn't a guy that has like blazing speed, but I thought his technique was sound. He seemed to have pretty good football IQ, especially that showed up in some of the team sessions. I mean, he wasn't biting on some of the double moves that you'd see other guys get burned on. And so Chris Johnson was another standout to me. In terms of safeties, Bud Clark was probably the biggest defensive back standout in Mobile out of TCU there. I think he was all over the place. This is a guy that played mostly strong safety and kind of slot corner, but has, I think, the capability to kind of play anywhere back there. He played, I want to say, a couple hundred free safety snaps as well. So he's a hyper versatile player, and it showed with what he was able to do in Mobile. Like I said, he was all over the place flying around. He had a couple interceptions. He was making big hits over the middle. His trigger downhill was phenomenal. So, if that's somebody I really have my eye on for the Steelers after the week. Michael Taffy, I think. I don't know how to say his last name, out of Texas. Primarily a free safety is another guy that stood out to me. I thought he did show off his long speed, his recovery speed on some of the routes. It's kind of hard to evaluate safeties in these settings because, they are most of the routes are kind of quick developing in these practices. Again, with the defensive line dominating so much, you're not seeing so much of the deep stuff come into play. And when they do trigger downhill, you're usually not seeing them tackle to the ground. So it's a little bit more difficult to evaluate some of the safeties. But I thought Taffy, in what I was able to see, was a standout. One more corner I did want to highlight, blanking on his name right now, out of North Carolina. Thaddeus Dixon, his name. He had, I think, 2 interceptions on the final day of practice. So that's going to get you on my list there. I think he was kind of running routes for receivers, and so he seems to be a guy that's able to stay in that hip pocket, able to change direction quickly, break on the routes and make plays on the ball. So good ball skills from him. Trying to think if there's anybody else. I think that's my list for now.
Mel, let me go to you, and just looking over the winners list that you guys compiled after the week was done, just kind of picking some different positions and going back to quarterback for a second. You had Jalen Daniels on your winners list, and so what made him stand out? Also, you included Louisiana linebacker Jaden Duggar, had 2 interceptions in practice. You had said, was he more of an edge guy, pass rusher, or more of a off-ball linebacker?
Duggar's more of an off-ball linebacker, and he just, I think, he was reading the offense as well and putting himself in position to succeed. So his his football IQ seems very high. I'm not that familiar with his college tape, and typically most of the college games that I watch occurs in January and February. So I'm just getting into those things now. But it just seemed like he was putting himself in position to succeed and getting in the right place, not by accident. With Jalen Daniels, he was very, very consistent throughout the week, and I think he showed that in the Shrine Bowl game as well. One of the things that I liked about him is that he showed up every day and just quietly led by example. You had, Cade Klubnik, who was really supposed to be the star of the Shrine Bowl and, dapping up his wide receivers and acting the leader. But in practice, that didn't really translate. And you could see that the players trusted Jalen Daniels in what he was doing in the team sessions. Things didn't always go as well as he would have wanted during the game, but he made plays when he had to. And I think he's someone that is going to be a potential project at the NFL. The question, of course, is his size because, at 6 foot, it takes a very special player to succeed in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. Josh, on your winners list, this is going to be a first, and I really love this. You just put the Naval Academy as a winner on your list. Can you explain what made the midshipmen so impressive? And the combine prospect invite list just got released. Unfortunately, one of those Navy guys you have on there, Landon Robinson, did not get an invite. So disappointing for him. Not invited.
Wow, he didn't get an invite.
At least according to the one tweet that I'm seeing. I'm not confirming that. I haven't looked at the actual list myself, but somebody's commenting on a list of players not invited. But what made Robinson so good to now be a combine snub?
Wow. Yeah, I mean, he came down there and I had followed Navy football for the last few years with this senior class because of the Pittsburgh ties with, Eli Heidenreich and Alex Teska. But Landon Robinson is one of the freakiest athletes in college football. I think he was number 11 on Bruce Feldman's freaks list coming into the year. But everybody's concern was he's undersized. But I mean, the guy is so explosive, and I was really curious to see how he was going to, show up at the Shrine Bowl, how he was going to handle, bigger guys, not in the American Athletic Conference, not in, in the Naval Academy, the Military Academy programs. And he showed up the first day, had some issues, getting off blocks. That size was becoming a factor, but then he figured it out, and he was just so explosive off the football. He has really good hands as a pass rusher, just so quick, and he models his game ironically after Aaron Donald. And I'm not saying he's Aaron Donald. No one should ever say that, but there are some flashes in there of that type of ability on the inside where, yes, he is 5'11", 291 pounds. Like, that's a major red flag for scouts immediately, and I understand that, but the guy can play. He is so strong. Like, I had a couple clips on Twitter throughout the week where he was taking on double teams, and you just cannot move him. Leverage is a huge part of his game, and it was impressive to see him figure things out after a rough day one, and then it really translated throughout the rest of the week and into the game. And, I just put the Naval Academy because when you think of NFL prospects and you think of big-time college football, like, it's not like the 1940s and 50s. Like, the military academies are not there. They're not getting the best athletes. They're not getting the best coaching. But what the Naval Academy has done in the last few years is pretty remarkable. And to have Landon Robinson dominating like he did throughout the week, and Eli Heidenreich having the week that he had, and all the success that Navy's had the last 2 years, it's pretty impressive that they've been able to churn out those two types of athletes right here on the doorstep of the NFL while still molding them into future, armed forces leaders. So it was really impressive to see.
Can confirm that Robinson is not on the combine list.
Wow, that blows my mind.
Heidenreich is. He'll be there, but Robinson, unfortunately, is not. Joe, on your winners list, you had one offensive lineman listed, and as you notice, sometimes it's hard for those guys to stand out, not always in pads. Some of these are defensive-minded drills, but you had Wyoming interior lineman Caden Barnett. What made his week special?
So throughout the week, it was really tough to evaluate a lot of these linemen because of how good a lot of the defensive lineman was and just some of the struggles, but Barnett was one guy that consistently, when there was a hole that was opened, it was Barnett was the guy that was opening it. And when I was watching the O-line, D-line one-on-ones, Barnett was consistently anchoring and standing his guy up. He was just somebody that, just showed off natural play strength. He seemed to be, really, really sound run blocker. He was driving his guy right up until the whistle. I think the general consensus was that he was, one of, if not the best offensive lineman that participated throughout the week. And I was impressed watching him. I mean, I had my eyes coming in on, Jaden Roberts and Armaj Reed Adams and some of these other bigger school guards, but Barnett was the one that I left the week saying that I wanted to see more of this guy, and that I think he's somebody that could be, a pretty solid pro.
Ross, looking at potential interior linemen, we'll see what happens with Isaac Seumalo. Obviously, going to be an unrestricted free agent. A lot of buzz, a lot of Steeler fans too, buzzing a little bit about Jennings Dunker out of Iowa. And I believe Alex and I had a brief conversation about him. I think Dunker mostly played on the right side, right tackle at Iowa. He did play, I think, a little bit of right guard. I think during Senior Bowl week, they had him at both right tackle and right guard as well too. Was Dunk? Talk about Dunker, the week he had. Is he going to have to kick inside? And who else interior wise on the offensive line needs some attention?
Yeah, I'll be interested to see where his arms come in at. That'll maybe help determine what he's going to play at the next level. But when I talked to a couple of other offensive linemen in Mobile, I think Bo Stevens, his teammate at Iowa, we asked, who's the strongest offensive lineman here? And they all said Jennings Dunker. So this is a guy who's known for just being very strong. His play strength was evident. I thought he had a pretty good week overall. Again, there was some pretty strong defensive linemen in attendance in Mobile. And so to stand out against that group is pretty notable. And I thought he was one that certainly did. Yeah, he did play a little bit of both in Mobile, and so I'll be interested to see where he ends up. I think another guy who really stood out to me in terms of interior guys, Keelan Rutledge. The first day of practice, they had to tell him to stop pancaking people. So that is usually a good sign for an offensive lineman. I'm not sure I've ever heard that be told to somebody in practice. Of course, it's a practice setting. Everyone's preparing for the draft. Nobody wants to get hurt. But man, that guy didn't care. And when I talked to him about it, he said, yeah, that's just how I play. Basically saying, I'm not going to change anything about what I'm doing. And I love that demeanor. He was showing that throughout the week. I mean, especially that first day before they had to tell him to tone it down. I mean, 4 or 5 pancakes in that first practice, just knocking people over. And he's a guy who would play, I would say, generously to the whistle, probably more through the whistle. There were even times like it just wasn't even necessary. Like the play was over and he still just kind of like has one arm on a guy, kind of giving him hell, if you will. And I love that in a guard. So Keelan Rutledge is somebody who I definitely took away from Mobile thinking, man, I would love to see him in a Steelers uniform. I think he's more of a right guard, and so I think his experience is all at right, if I'm not mistaken. So, trying to get him over to left guard, depending on what happens to Seumalo, since McCormick seems pretty entrenched at right guard. I guess that's to be determined. But yeah, Rutledge is definitely someone on my radar. There were some guys who maybe played more tackle in college and looked better kind of playing guard in Mobile. Cage Casey was one of those. I thought he had a up and down week, but better when they had him playing inside. That is, I think, a tackle out of Boise State. Not a ton of guard experience, and so what he was showing in Mobile at guard impressed me, and I think there's something there that he can continue to work with. I think he measured in at like 6'5", so again, this is a guy whose arm length's probably going to come into play. I think talking to him in Mobile, I think he said that some teams had kind of been discussing a move inside for him, so that's somebody to watch as well. There were a bunch of centers that stuck out too. I don't know if any of those guys can kick out to guard. I'm blanking on the Florida center's name right now.
Was it Jake Slaughter?
Or sorry, not Florida, Miami center.
Oh.
James Brockermeyer, that's his name. Yeah, he had a really strong week, and that's a guy that had just finished playing in the national championship like a couple of days earlier. And so you like to see those guys coming out and competing. I don't know if he's a guy who could kick out to guard, but he had the skills to. I mean, he was impressive to me. His anchor, he was anchoring against some of these impressive defensive linemen really well. I mean, he was one of the few that was winning in the one-on-one drills in terms of offensive linemen.
Real quick, Ross, the top off the ball linebackers, I would imagine at the Senior Bowl, Jacob Rodriguez, who probably didn't need much of an introduction going into the week, and Kyle Lewis out of Pitt seemed to be a huge riser at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, those two stood out, and they were playing next to each other most of the time because they were on the same team there. So they were practicing together a lot. What I'll say about Jacob Rodriguez, he seemed to be running the show in terms of he was getting everybody lined up. If people were misaligned prior to the snap, he was the one communicating that. He seemed to be in command of the defense. And in a setting like the Senior Bowl, where you're basically learning a new system on the go, you're not having your college coaches or anything, and you're kind of responsible for picking up a defense in a week and digesting that and then being able to communicate that to others. That stood out to me in a big way. And just as much, his play was impressive as well. I thought he does everything well. He could cover, he could come downhill. He was physical. He seems to have good athletic skills. So, yeah, Jacob Rodriguez is very solid. But Kyle Lewis did steal the show. I think not many expected him to be the top guy, but I think he left Mobile as kind of the top inside backer. Now, will he get drafted first? Probably, maybe not, because he's a little bit undersized. Just trying to figure out what to do with him. Is he more of kind of like a Peyton Wilson kind of dime player, or what to do with Kyle Lewis? But he certainly showed that he has NFL caliber talents. He was great in coverage. Guys coming over the middle of the field, he was just laying the hit stick on them and had a couple very big hits that drew a reaction from the crowd. I think he forced at least one fumble, just jarring it free with the big hits he was making. And so he plays bigger than his size, his coverage skills. I mean, he carried, I can't remember who he was running with. I think it was a receiver, though, and he carried him like 30 yards downfield, carried him vertically and was right in the hip pocket the whole time. So this is a guy that stood out in a big way, definitely.
I want to kind of close out here by getting your guys' sleepers. If it's a thing you already mentioned before, that's fine. But Mel, I want to start with you. Just kind of give me from your view of the week down there at your respective All-Star game. Who was your top sleeper? And Mel, obviously, you have the eagle eye when it comes to the sleeper at the Shrine Bowl, that future gem of a player, Jake Bobo, Isaiah Pacheco, names you've mentioned in the past. Who's going to be that guy this year?
And Mel likes to focus mainly on running backs and wide receivers, by the way.
Yeah, it's her forte. So what do you got for us, Mel? You're muted right now if you're answering. If I'm not sure your car situation.
Sorry. Yes, I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you three sleepers, but I'll go fast.
Okay.
Number one is a wide receiver I've already mentioned, Dylan Bell out of Georgia. He did not get a lot of opportunities in college, but he made every single one count. On receptions, he averaged 9.9 yards per catch. On rushing attack, he averaged 6.4 yards per carry. He's physical. He can get separation. He had some beautiful deep catches during practice. He's going to go in the third day, I think, and I think some team's going to be very happy with him. He could start in the NFL. In the running back group, Chip Trianum is going to be going like below anyone's notice because he's bounced around to 5 different schools. But his last season at Toledo, he was super solid. He is a physical back who can, run up the middle. But when he gets outside or breaks free, he is so fast and he's gone. He had long runs of 57, 75 yards. And once he gets into free space, no one's going to catch him. In the edge group, Mason Reiger is probably going to go late day 3. And oh my God, I love this man. He is a physical beast. Steeler fans will love him because he's a Wisconsin Badger edge rusher. We love them. He's only been there for 1 year. He missed the 2024 season with injury. He bounced back incredibly well. Seeing him in practice, He's got more than one move to get free and get around the edge, and I think he's going to wreak havoc in the NFL.
Yeah, Alex and I talked a little bit about him coming out of the Shrine Bowl week, and he measures up just what the Steelers look for. Obviously, a Wisconsin product. He had a big game in the actual game itself, so that's a guy that I'm probably going to deep dive at some point. So that's a good pull there, Mel.
Yeah, good info, Mel. I know you got to get going into your real job of being Dr. Mel, so appreciate all the coverage and interviews and everything that you offered here today, Mel. So great job as always.
All right, I'm going to run to pre-op. Thanks so much for the opportunity and appreciate everything.
Of course, we'll talk to you soon. All right, Josh, your sleeper of the week. Who's the top name to know?
Oh man, the one name that I kept coming back to, I'm going to stay in the edge group, was Wesley Williams out of Duke. That guy flashed all week long. He was kind of the Bash Bro opposite Mason Reiger in the Shrine Bowl game itself. He really impressed. He's long, he's athletic, he can really bend the edge. I really want to do a deep dive on him at Duke because he wasn't a name that was really on my radar coming in, but then he looks like a physical specimen on the field.
6'3", 3/8", 251, 32-inch arms, 9 and 6/8" hands on Wesley Williams out of Duke there.
Yeah, and it was impressive to watch him up close and in person. And the other one that I kept coming back to that I thought was really good early in the week and just was very consistent steadily throughout was Micah Morris, guard from Georgia. I think he was in the second or third group for the East team, but every time he was out there, he was winning one-on-one pass rush reps. He was locking guys up. He was physical in the run game. In the game itself, I thought he was arguably the best lineman on the field, but just didn't get a lot of buzz throughout the week. But every time I put on the tape, he popped on film, and he's got a lot of experience coming out of Georgia. And we know that the Steelers like their Georgia Bulldogs, especially in the trenches. So that was a name that I had circled there as kind of a sleeper to pay attention to.
Was he mostly left or right guard at Georgia? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't, but down at the Shrine Bowl, he was mostly left guard.
Okay.
And Joe, you had Wesley Williams on your winners list, so there's some good synergy there. But Joe, who's your sleeper that really kind of caught your attention throughout the week?
Yeah, I'm going to go with a guy I mentioned before, just Anthony Smith. I mean, I really didn't expect much coming in from him. Came from the Hula Bowl. He had like 15 million different stickers on his helmet, so he looked a little bit goofy. But he consistently just stood out. I mean, he had a one-handed catch at one point in practice. He was just such a fluid mover. Made plays downfield, made plays in short yardage situations. I was just super impressed with him. I wish he played in the game. A little bummed that we didn't get to see him in that setting, but was super impressed with what he brought to the table from when he was in Frisco.
And Ross, from the Senior Bowl, what sleeper stuck out to you?
Yeah, Nadame Tucker out of Western Michigan, I think. He stood out in a big way. I mean,
what
even
position?
he's an edge rusher,
Okay. Cool.
Outside linebacker. He had 5 tackles in the actual game and 2 sacks and a forced fumble in the game itself. And that was a continuation of what he showed all week in practice. And I don't think he was on too many people's radar as a Western Michigan guy. I think he made himself a lot of money in Mobile. There always seems to be one or two of those small school guys that make a name for themselves at the event. Another guy, Josh Cameron, wide receiver. He's maybe not like a true, like day 3 type of sleeper. I think enough people are aware of him, but the wide receiver out of Baylor, I mean, he was just catching everything that came his way. It didn't matter if he was in traffic. It didn't matter if it was a jump ball. It didn't matter if it was over the shoulder, if it was back, adjusting to a back shoulder throw. I mean, he was catching absolutely everything, made one of the most impressive catches of the week on the first day of practice. Very impressive kid when I talked to him as well. I mean, he just seems like a great guy, a great locker room presence. Not going to, give anybody any issues. So Josh Cameron's another one. Kevin Coleman Jr., a wide receiver out of Mizzou, is another sleeper. Smaller guy. I think he's only like 175 pounds wet. And so, that's always something to think about coming to the next level. But he was consistently creating good separation. And there was a lot of buzz about him in the stands at practice. I think he's another guy that made himself some money, maybe find his way into the top, 120, 150 kind of range. And when you're that size, you have to be standing out in a pretty big way to do that. And so I thought he accomplished that in Mobile.
Joe had mentioned Micah Morris there. It looks like last year Micah Morris at Georgia primarily looked like 700 snaps at left guard, 1 at right guard. There you go back to 2024 on him. He predominantly played on the right side, 331 at right guard, 94 at left guard, and then even buzzing back to 2023 on Micah Morris. Even more at left guard, 327 snaps versus 2 at right guard, even played 4 snaps, it looks like, in totality at left tackle. So this is a guy, at least when it looks like interior, and I think he's a little bit heavier weighted guard as well too. So I think this is a guy that's got experience playing both guard spots when it comes to Micah Morris there. We haven't talked a lot about defensive linemen as a whole. Obviously, the Steelers took 2 in the draft last year in Derek Harmon and Y.A. Black and all. The Steelers, if you're looking at those 3, 4, kind of 5 tech guys, Steelers like them usually 6'4" or taller, pretty decent arm length on them. Is there each one of you pick out at least one defensive lineman, Ross at the Shrine Bowl and Josh and Joe, or Ross at the Senior Bowl and Josh and Joe at the Shrine Bowl? Each of you pick out one defensive lineman that you could see, maybe not necessarily first couple of rounds, but mid to late rounds that the Steelers might have interest in. Ross, we'll start with you.
Well, I'll talk about one at the top, and I actually just did his scouting report, and Caleb Banks out of Florida is one that has to be mentioned. He fits everything you just talked about. I'm pretty sure he's going to check most, if not all, of the boxes, though, there's some debate about whether those boxes will still be the same boxes given the new coaching staff. But, 3-4 system calls for what it calls for, and Caleb Banks fits the description. I think he's somewhere in the 6'6" range. I think he's going to have plenty of arm length. He's super athletic for his size, and he dominated in Mobile, probably after Lee Hunter, maybe the most dominant defensive lineman there. And I thought day one, maybe a little quiet, and then, man, he really stood out over the next couple of days. I think he ended up getting a sack in the game as well, and so he did carry that over into live action. So, yeah, when I did his scouting report, there was a lot of issues with, he ends up on the ground a lot, and so you don't like to see that with your defensive lineman. And so there is some question, at least in my mind, of body control for him. But man, he's the type of guy where if he could put it all together, you're talking about like a Stephon Tuitt type of individual who can be that type of disruptive force at the size that he is. So definitely a rare talent if he can put it together. And then I will talk about one like super late round, maybe even undrafted guy who could feasibly end up on the radar is Jeffrey Mba out of SMU. This is a guy that is actually a French player. And so could he be the Steelers' next international pathway player I don't know if Julius Welshoff is still eligible or not, but even if he isn't, or even if he is, Jeffrey Mba could be kind of the next guy to slot into that, just because he's exactly what you want from a 3-4 end. He's 6'5", 316, somewhere in that range. He's got very long arms. This is a guy who didn't start playing football until later in his life. He's from Gabon and then moved to France. And then next thing you know, he I think he went to a football camp in France. I talked to him, and next thing you know, he's in Baltimore at some private high school playing football. And I think he had to spend his first year at, I think it was in the JUCO system. I can't remember which one. And then he transferred like 3 or 4 times, ended up at SMU, and had a pretty decent season in his last year. So this is a guy who could definitely end up on the Steelers' radar as like a 7th round. I mean, the Steelers have 12 picks. So if you want to take a flyer on the guy with ideal measurements, this might be the guy.
Joe, how about a mid to late round defensive lineman at the Shrine Bowl?
Yeah, so I wanted to give you Darryl Jackson Jr., but I think he's probably going to be off the board by the middle round. So I'll give you Illinois' James Thompson Jr. He ruptured his Achilles early in his career in 2021, but yeah, put together a really nice career at Illinois. He had a sack, he had a tackle for a loss in the Shrine Bowl game itself. Consistently won his one-on-ones during the week. He's 6'5", 301, so maybe could afford to tack on a few extra pounds, but he's got the length and height that the Steelers look for, and I think he'll be around probably in that mid to late round area where the team will probably be looking to target a defensive lineman.
Josh, what you got for me to close things out here on a defensive lineman mid to late round from the Shrine Bowl week?
I'll give you a late round guy here. I think he's more 7th or UDFA. It's DeMonte Capehart from Clemson. I did have him, I believe, in my losers. He did not have a good week down there. But again, he's just under 6'5". I'm trying to find the exact measurement. 6'04", 314. He's got 33 3/8-inch arms. He's played a lot of football at Clemson. Was more of a rotational guy, but if you're looking for some size, some experience there late in a draft, a guy that can play up and down the offensive line, give you some decent snaps, that's a name that I could see them taking a flyer on, especially with the history that the front office has with that Clemson program and how much they've scouted them, and they attend the pro day heavily. Of course, that could change this year, but that's a name that I went into the week kind of looking at as a late round option.
Alex, before we get out of here, let's ask Joe and Josh's opinions about off the ball linebackers there at Shrine Bowl.
Yeah,
Joe?
if you guys go,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. So number one standout was by far in practice is Harold Perkins Jr. He was probably the biggest name coming in. He kind of played a little bit of everywhere, but he's more than likely going to play off the ball in the NFL. He was a standout, as is Torian York. I heard great things about just him as a leader as well, but he's a little bit undersized, but he plays with his hair on fire. I think those two guys were key standouts. And then we talked about Jaden Duggar a little bit. Jaden Duggar just made so many plays. He was great in coverage. Had his keys, had some good run fits. Other one I would say that stood out to me was Jackson Kuwach from Miami of Ohio. He had the interception that ended the Shrine Bowl game, kind of on a late heave, but he was the guy that was just always around the ball, always making plays. He had another interception in practice. Seemed to be stout in coverage. A guy that would just always seemed to be asking questions as well. So I think those four were kind of the guys that were above the rest of the pack for me.
Josh, I remember I think a couple of tweets out of you and comments on Gentry.
Yes.
6'6", 3/8, 221, 10 and 10.5-inch hands. Those are some lobster crackers, and he's got some back scratchers on him as well too. I think 35 and a quarter. Is that one that you want to talk about?
That is the name that I was going to highlight there. He had an awesome week, both against the run and in pass coverage. I think there were back-to-back plays on day 2 where he was just reading the quarterback's eyes from his off-ball linebacker spot and just jumped into passing lanes and knocked it down. And when you have that type of length at that position, you can do that. He plays a physical brand of football, but he is rail thin in person, and he looks very much out of place at linebacker in his pads, but he's got the right mentality. Philadelphia native. He actually started out at Arizona State playing for Herm Edwards and Antonio Pierce and Marvin Lewis, so he's got a nice little background there. Went to USC, was a key linebacker there, made a number of plays. It showed up throughout the week in Frisco, and then unfortunately, like a lot of players, he made the business decision to not play in the game. But I think that guy is going to test off the charts. Ironically, he did tell me down there that he models his game after Patrick Queen. So there are some people that hear that and are maybe a little bit concerned. But the guy is just a playmaker. He was around the football consistently. And I think that size is not going to hinder him. I think he's going to be a unicorn, and a lot of people are going to be very interested in him. The other one that I really liked, I know that we've talked about Duggar a lot, former safety at Georgetown, moved to linebacker, but Lander Barton, you want to talk about a guy that has that NFL pedigree from a bloodlines perspective, older brother Cody, and I think Joe did the interview with him. There was another brother that's played in the NFL as well, but that's a guy that's played all over at Utah. I think last year he even got some snaps at tight end, really good in coverage. He can run with linebackers out of the backfield. He can carry tight ends up the seam. He's handled, kind of that slot role at times too at Utah. That's a guy that I think is going to have a really good combine, and people are going to start turning on the tape and diving further into him. So, off-ball linebacker was pretty solid. I think there are a lot of pros in this group. The one name I was disappointed that couldn't perform was Red Murdoch out of Buffalo. One of the best linebackers in the country, over 140 tackles in each of the last 2 years. Was an All-American this past year. Grew up a Steeler fan, which that'll help with this fan base. But he is a complete linebacker, kind of that downhill thumper. He set the national record, I believe, for forced fumbles in a career was 17. So the guy just has a nose for the football, makes a ton of plays, but was dealing with a slight fracture in his left ankle that he actually played through a high ankle sprain last year. And then during training, it ended up just giving way on him. So he was out for the Shrine Bowl, and don't know if he's going to be good enough to go for the Combine. But that was the other name.
Gentry has that Ted Hendricks build. Did he talk about how he ended up playing inside linebacker at 6'6"?
Yes, he did. So he actually started out at safety. Safety and receiver. And there was at one point in high school where he was actually going to give up football and pursue basketball. And 6'6", really athletic guy. But one day, I'm trying to remember, Newman Goretti High School in Philadelphia in the Catholic school program, he had a coach come up to him and say, "Hey, have you ever thought about playing closer to the line of scrimmage?" And he had kind of laughed about it. It was like, I'm a safety and a receiver. I play out of the box, but he gave it a try and he loved it. And everywhere he's gone, people have said, you ever think about moving to edge or, kind of playing that hybrid safety role? And he's always been adamant, like, I'm staying at off-ball linebacker. This is what I am. This is what I'm good at. But it was very much a coach looking out for him in a sense of like, hey, I think you could be more impactful around the line of scrimmage. Teams can't avoid you as much. And it took off. I think he was I want to say he was a 4-star recruit coming out of the Philadelphia area and linked up with Antonio Pierce, and kind of the rest is history there.
Is he gonna run? He should run like the wind, shouldn't he?
He should. He told me that he's expecting to run a 4.44, which if he does that with his size and all that, I mean, yeah, good luck for NFL teams. But I think he's going to have a phenomenal combine. I'm hoping he's on the combine invite list. If he's not, then I have no idea anymore. But yeah, that guy is a gifted athlete and a true football player. Like it showed up all week in Frisco.
All right,
Dave. Any final questions for the guys?
No. I think we got a good smattering of positions there. Talked about a lot of players within this hour, like we normally do, and obviously the closer we get to the draft, we'll probably have another roundtable session or two, and go over guys and talk more about combine stuff.
All right, sounds good. So appreciate all you guys, for Joe and Josh and Ross and Mel, who just had to depart from us a moment ago to do her day job. So appreciate all that. I also want to shout out Nathan Costco, who wasn't here today, but he helped out Ross down at the Senior Bowl and is producing scouting reports for us. So appreciate you guys this time. We'll have you on again soon, and thank you again. And welcome back to the Terrible Podcast. Again, our special thanks to Melanie Friedlander, Josh Carney, Joe Clark, and Ross McCorkle for their time on the podcast, and of course, all the time they spent down in their respective cities covering the Shrine and Senior Bowl. Great information, practice reports, and interviews and insight into the future class of 2026.
All right. Always let you know that draft season's here when we have that Roundtable podcast. And a shout out to who is it? Nate also was down for a day, I think, with Ross down there in Mobile as well too. So we've already got a large selection of draft profiles up on the site. We have a few mock drafts up there already as well too. We have Alex chiming in on one of his draft crushes already in Omar Cooper, right? And you had a write up on him. So it's that time of year, and we obviously look to be having on back on those people on back again as we get closer to the draft. So appreciate all the work that they did in Frisco and Mobile, respectively.
That was Nate Costco that was down there for a day. You can follow him on Twitter at Nate Costco, and provided some supplemental coverage for us down in Mobile. And yeah, Omar Cooper, the receiver you mentioned, might be the worst kept secret. I think everyone now has fallen in love with this guy. Dean Brugler had him as a top 32 player in his most recent top 100 rankings. All right, Dave, let's close out today's show with a couple of reader emails.
All right, let's start with Chris Warren back in here. Hope springs eternal. I appreciate your fair and sober-minded analysis, and it keeps me grounded. Nevertheless, I would like to make the case for why Steeler fans should be optimistic about the 2026 season. He says the difference between an 8-9-10 team and 11-6 team often boils down to a couple of players. Think about how good this defense might have been had Deshaun Elliott not gotten hurt, and think about how good Jalen Ramsey might be at free safety with more time in the position, and a guy like Elliott acting as the communication hub. He says, likewise, think about how good Rodgers looked at times when he had time in the pocket to work. Imagine how consistently good he could be with the addition of a number 2 wide receiver to win off the line and get open quickly. It could open this offense in ways we haven't seen since 2018. He says, I understand that there are many things that would have to fall the right way, but at the beginning of the offseason, is there any reason why we should not be cautiously optimistic? Look, if obviously we'll have to see what happens with Aaron Rodgers. We'll have to see what happens with a guy like Jalen Ramsey, who we just talked about. We'll have to see what happens with Cam Heyward. Is he going to come back? And then, we'll obviously, how what kind of play will this team make in free agency? Personally, I don't think this team's going to go hog wild in free agency. There will be signings as there are every year. I'm just not convinced that they're going to be as hog wild as most people want this team to be. And then look, you got 12 draft picks to play with, several within the top 100. What's this draft class look like, and how quickly can they help out? I think the overarching, at least thought right now, and this assumes, let's say, Aaron Rodgers is a quarterback. Could this team at least go 10-7 in 2026? I think the easy answer to that is yes, they could. Could they maybe improve by one game? Feels where I'm at right now, that feels a little pushing it, but I suppose not out of the question. It all comes into, are you happy with a winning season? Are you happy with making the playoffs and getting one and done again? I think that's the biggest thing. If you want to talk about the ultimate goal of getting to the Super Bowl and winning the Super Bowl, to me, it's hard to be optimistic, especially if Aaron Rodgers is your quarterback, and especially what we see on paper as this team shapes up right now. The fan part of you, I imagine the closer we get to the season, will probably lend to be more optimistic. It generally is. I can imagine myself throwing out another 10-7 prediction, or 9-8, or I don't think it's going to take a lot to get me to 11-6. I think, but I guess his point is. He thinks this team can be better than 2025, but I would rebuttal back, how much better, and what does that really get you?
Yeah, I never want to be somebody that tells somebody to be optimistic or pessimistic. We just kind of give our thoughts, and if you have a differing take, then that's totally fine. And there are reasons to be optimistic. A new coaching staff, new ideas could potentially be a shot in the arm for this team. 12 draft picks could be a historic haul for the Steelers that can infuse talent in a lot of quick and meaningful and impactful ways if you draft right. Of course, you have to get the picks right. That's obvious no matter how many selections you have. And you have an offensive line that feels like is in a good place and is still ascending and building, and a group that you invested heavily in that seems to be paying off. And so those are all reasons to be optimistic. But let's get a good look at this roster with a new coaching staff, free agency, bunch of draft picks. There's still going to be a lot of turnover in terms of who's on this roster to get excited about. I'm sure after draft, we'll be talking about an impressive draft class and the impact and potential those guys have. I'm sure we'll like a couple of the free agent moves they bring in. So, it's hard to, I'm not really in an optimistic or pessimistic stance right now because we are still so early in the offseason and one that's going to be so full of change in so many ways for this team, and already has been full of change. So I'm not really in a camp of how I perceive this roster and this team yet, but there are certainly some things to be excited about.
Look, the next step in evaluating this team is to see what cuts are made by the start of the new league year, see how active or inactive they are during free agency, and then obviously what does the draft class shape up to be. So we do this in stages. I'm not going to make any long-term predictions right now, but as I sit right now, I'd be foolish to go out here and promote optimism that this is a team that can make a run in the playoffs right now. Now, will my opinion change once we get back past some of these key dates on the NFL calendar? We'll see, but let's kind of leave it at that. Jeff Kinney has an interesting question in here. Would Aaron Rodgers signing elsewhere yield a potential comp pick for the Steelers in the 2027 draft? If so, even more reason to look elsewhere. Jeff, first and foremost, no moves that this team makes of whether to re-sign or let a player walk in free agency should be based with the idea this is what a player might bring us in the compensatory draft draft pick compensation there. That should be the last thing on the team's mind when it comes to decisions on players. To answer the question specifically, doesn't his age and all dictate that the most that they could get is what as far as comp value goes?
Yeah, there's a rule. I think it's if you're above 30, although it's for non-quarterback, I believe is that a rule. But I think Ross McCorkle said if you're 10 years in the league, you can only get a max of a fifth-round comp pick. So I'm not sure if Rodgers being a quarterback changes that because I believe there was a carve-out in the age aspect for a non-quarterback. But, either way, you're not looking at an incredibly high comp pick, even if that restriction doesn't apply. You'd be looking at maybe at best a fourth rounder and still probably more likely a fifth round type of compensation, which is so minuscule that it's not going to dictate whether or not you want to bring Rodgers back or not.
Right. So the gray area there is him being the quarterback versus the age, right?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure all the rules on that. I know that generally if you're above 30, that your max is. This happened with Alan Faneca, I think, years and years ago whenever he left for the Jets, I think it was. So we'll see. That would also apply to Malu, though, in terms of comp picks. So in terms of what you might get back, Gainwell, would that get you something? Again, all depends on who you sign. I mean, all likelihood, Pittsburgh's going to sign somebody, and so that's going to cancel out a Rodgers or Malu or Gainwell or somebody like that. So you're not going to get the bountiful harvest of comp picks that you're getting for 2026. And plus that comp pick, you wouldn't get that until 2027. So it's a fifth round pick in a draft 2 years from now or two draft classes from now. It's pretty minor in the grand scope of deciding whether or not you want Rodgers back.
All right, let's take one from Arthur Elliott to close out this show here. Hi, Dave and Alex. My question today is, what is your take on how Omar the con artist has done so far as the Steelers GM? Although I believe he's been successful overall, my thought is the last 2 seasons post-draft have been detrimental to the Steelers' chances of making a run in the postseason, creating holes with no way to fill them as they were created post-draft. The examples that come to my head are Pickens for a third. He says, how much better would this team have been with Pickens this year, Dante last year, and Minka this year? One of the defense's biggest needs this year was a middle of the field safety. Here's the thing about Pickens. The way he was likely to be used in this offense with Aaron Rodgers, I mean, could obviously, if you had Pickens, you probably weren't going to get DK Metcalf, though, right?
No, you could have done both. They could have just kept Pickens. There was nothing that prevented them from doing both.
Right, but Pickens would have had his feelings hurt big time to see them turn around and then that becomes an aspect of it. While it's not off the field, this team obviously felt like Pickens wasn't worth dealing with overall, and that's why they shipped him away. It wasn't from a talent overall, talent aspect of there. Now, the biggest thing that that comes to mind is Pickens went out the door, Metcalf came in, but what did you do to even bolster that receiving group even more past that?
Yeah, that's a fair critique, and that was a critique in 2024 and 2025. Who's your number 2 receiver? In 24 when it was Pickens, and 25 when it was Metcalf. The question was just could Metcalf and Pickens and Rodgers and Arthur Smith all coexist? And Pittsburgh's answer and conclusion to that was no, they couldn't, and that's why Pickens got shipped out. They knew they were not going to re-sign this guy after the season, so they got the pick for him now instead of the potential comp pick for, I guess it'd be like 2027. So I'm not saying, again, I'm not going to go over the Pickens and relitigate that all over again, but I think Omar, to the question of the job that he's done, we had a debate on Twitter yesterday. I think they've drafted better than Kevin Colbert. I think they've drafted well. Have they been drafting at an elite level? No. So still some work to do there. I do like the vision that Khan and maybe Andy Weidl's had an influence on this too, of really focusing on the trenches and rebuilding this offensive line, investing in it heavily, things Colbert tended to ignore in those last couple of years in the GM chair, getting the defensive line, getting some investments there. So I think that's been a good foundation that's largely been effective. But then the question is, okay, what's the next step? And the team has felt a little rudderless beyond, let's build the trenches and get your O-line and D-line to be in a better place. And I think they're still trying to figure out how to reshape and mold the rest of the roster.
All right, and although he did not include this in the email, a lot of people will point to probably saying, well, the deal that they gave T.J. Watt is part of the general manager's doing as well too overall. But and look, I mean, did T.J. Watt earn his full cash value last year? I think the short answer is no, right?
Sure, yeah, he didn't.
All right,
You would say that.
What else were what else were you going to do in that situation? You were backed in the corner where I don't say you had to do the deal, but the only way he was going to sign the deal was the deal pretty much that he got.
Well, yeah,
And
people would just say, then don't do the deal. That'd be the argument against.
and then how would that have gone?
Well, some people would say that whatever that alternative would have been was better than paying Watt all this money if he doesn't end up getting good return on that deal. Of course, many would suggest that trading TJ Watt was a popular thought last year and still is today.
Right. And then how would you replace that? I mean, so look, moving forward, obviously into this second year of that deal, it's going to be magnified to see if because as I said, he is the top cash earner on this team. I think in 33 million. What did I say it was? What is his cash earnings? Yeah. Anyway, he leads the team in cash earnings right now for 2026. Can he at least rebound and have a much better season than he had? Let's see, he's set to earn $42 million in cash this year.
Yeah, again, just trying to zoom out about Omar Khan in general. I think his team's been trying to wear a lot of different hats or outfits. Let's try this on
I'm
for
sorry,
size.
32 million in cash this year. 42 is
Okay.
cap number.
Gotcha. So I think Pittsburgh's still trying to figure out who they want to be offensively, who they want to be defensively. Obviously, they've just had a bunch of scheme changes, a big difference going from Arthur Smith to now Mike McCarthy. So that's kind of changed things on the fly. They built that roster very much for the Arthur Smith system, and now it's going to get flipped to the McCarthy system. Defensively, they wanted to play a lot more man coverage last year. That may still change. It may remain the same under Patrick Graham. That's kind of his background, but he's pretty flexible in terms of the coverages that he plays, the schemes that he deploys. So I think Pittsburgh's still trying to figure out who they want to be, their identity beyond just having some good trenches, which is huge, but there's still another part to your roster than just good trenches.
Is the two biggest criticisms, or should the two biggest criticisms of Omar Khan right now for the last two seasons be how he's handled the wide receiver room in totality, and then the T.J. Watt contract?
I think receivers won. I mean, the big picture, the big elephant in the room is quarterback. How are you handling quarterback? What is your plan there? And Pittsburgh, of course, is just kind of rolling through 1-year names, stopgap names, bridges, veterans. They missed on Kenny Pickett, which is not Omar Khan's fault, wasn't in the chair then. But that's the big picture thought of you can't get anywhere until you get the quarterback in place. And how is Pittsburgh approaching quarterback? What is their vision to find that long-term guy? Lately, it's been a lot of the more 1 year older end of their career quarterbacks, which even if it gets you a little bit of progress, it's not a long-term solution, obviously. So that is the chief critique of Khan and this organization until they find that solution.
Obviously, draft classes around the league are important to every NFL team, and the Steelers really put, probably more onus on that than some other teams around the league here. How important in the grand scheme of things is this 2026 draft class?
I mean, it's obviously every year we say it's really important. They're like elections. Every election's the most important one ever, and every draft class the most important one, of that time. But this one is really important because of the unique number of selections. Pittsburgh has 12 projected, 5 in the top 100. Will they draft 12 guys? Probably not, but I still think they're going to have 9, 10 guys in this draft class. Omar Khan talked about this was an old roster for 2025, but he wasn't too concerned about that because of all these draft picks. It's going to infuse a bunch of youth at a really high level, kind of that Cleveland type of class. You get a bunch of rookies in it you can hopefully build towards. So, it maybe not be as consequential as 27, because assuming you don't find a quarterback this year, that quarterback in 27 maybe franchise changing and defining, but it's really important to infuse youth and talent and really fix a lot of holes with the new coaching staff in to really align systems and schemes and use that draft capital to accelerate that process.
All right, we got through a couple of emails here and obviously had an hour conversation with our All-Star Game attendees, so we went a different direction there. We've got about 2 hours, I think, in the can right now, so apologies if we weren't able to get to your email question in this show. Alex, what do we got on deck for what are we going to talk about on Friday here, you think?
It's a great question. I'll get back to you on that one. We'll see what other news comes in, but we're working on our scouting reports, draft coverage, and I got some other kind of Steelers topics planned out. I got an article on Patrick Graham and how he's got to get some more takeaways beyond his history for Pittsburgh's defense to continue that history of taking the football away. So we'll find something to get ourselves into, Dave, on Friday.
All right, and I'll try to get my cap update done by Friday. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the salary cap situation that this team is in as well, too. And obviously, if you have a question you would like us to try to get to on this show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. Once again, if you got any thoughts on Jalen Ramsey, is he worth $19.5 million in cash in 2026? Send that along as well, too. So shout out once again to Josh Carney, Joe Clark, Ross McCorkle, Melanie Friedlander for coming on the show today. Make sure to follow all those peeps on the Twitter machine if you're not already doing so. You can follow me on Twitter/X at Steelers Depot. Follow Alex at Alex_Kozora. Follow the show at Terrible Podcast. Email the show, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com. If you like what we do and want to donate, SteelersDepot.com, hit the donate button. We've got the ad-free sign-up page back visible again that had some gremlins in it, so apologies for that. You can go to ad-free on the menu bar on SteelersDepot.com. Follow directions that way. If you've had any issues signing up in the past, shoot me an email, theterriblepodcast@gmail.com, if you're having problems accessing the ad-free version of the site on SteelersDepot.com. So until Friday, as always. Oh, you're a good teammate, by the way, Alex. I just want to throw that out there.
Thank you.
You're a very good teammate. So, as always, thanks for listening to the Terrible Podcast with Dave and Alex.